Sometimes the greatest breakthroughs in life don't come when you take giant leaps. They come when you choose to go just a little further in faith, a little further in prayer, a little further in love, and a little further in perseverance. When the disciples had fished all night and caught nothing, Jesus told them, launch out into the deep. They could have argued, they could have quit, but instead they chose to push the boat a little further. And on the other side of that small step of obedience, they experienced a miracle so great their nets couldn't contain it. When we think about breakthroughs, we often imagine something dramatic, sudden, and earth-shaking. We picture massive changes that turn our lives around overnight. But the truth is, most of the greatest victories in life are not the result of one giant leap. They are the result of small, consistent steps taken in faith. Small steps may feel insignificant in the moment, but they carry within them the power to unlock extraordinary results. Consider the disciples who had fished all night and caught nothing. Exhausted, ready to give up, they sat in their boat with empty nets. Then came the instruction, launch out into the deep and let down your nets. That command didn't ask them to build a new boat, sail across the world, or reinvent fishing. It was simply to go a little further and drop the nets again, a small step. But on the other side of that small act of obedience was the greatest catch they had ever seen, so large that their nets began to break. That miracle wasn't born from a giant leap. It was born from a small step. In our own lives, we often underestimate the significance of small acts of faith. A prayer whispered in the middle of the night when no one else knows your struggle, a choice to forgive when bitterness would feel easier, a decision to show up one more day when quitting would be more comfortable. These steps may seem too small to matter, but they are the very steps that build the path to breakthrough. What seems little in your eyes is often great in God's hands. We live in a world obsessed with instant results. People want quick fixes, overnight success, and immediate answers. But God's process often works differently. He asks us to trust Him in the small things before He entrusts us with the big. Small steps reveal faithfulness. They prove that we're willing to keep walking even when we don't see instant results. And in that steady movement forward, something powerful happens. Momentum builds. One step leads to another, and suddenly you've traveled farther than you ever thought possible. Think about the way a seed works. It's tiny, barely noticeable, but when planted in the ground, it carries the potential for an entire tree, even a whole forest. You don't see the breakthrough the moment the seed is planted. You don't hear a trumpet blast when the first root breaks through the soil. But over time, with water, light, and care, that small beginning becomes something strong, fruitful, and enduring. Your faith is the same way. Every small prayer, every small step of obedience, every act of kindness or perseverance is a seed that carries within it the potential for a harvest beyond what you can imagine. Sometimes the greatest challenge is not taking a step. It's believing that the step matters. We think, what's the use of praying one more time? What difference will it make to forgive again? Why should I try when I've failed so many times? But it's in those very moments when you feel like your steps don't matter that you must remind yourself, God sees every step. He honors persistence. He rewards faith that keeps moving forward, no matter how small the movement may seem. The enemy would love nothing more than to convince you to stop just short of your breakthrough, to quit praying right before the answer comes, to give up believing just before the door opens. But small steps taken consistently defy that temptation. They are your declaration that you will not stop here, that you will keep moving forward until the breakthrough arrives. So do not despise small beginnings. Do not look down on the little steps you are taking right now. They are building a path that leads to something greater than you can see today. Every small act of faith is a building block of destiny. Every small choice to trust God is laying the foundation for a future of victory. And when the breakthrough comes, you will look back and realize it was not one giant leap that brought you there. It was the power of small steps faithfully taken that led you into your miracle. Obedience is one of the most powerful forces in the life of a believer, yet it is often overlooked because it does not always seem dramatic. We live in a culture that celebrates talent, strength, and independence, but in God's kingdom, the path to blessing is often paved with simple obedience. Over and over again in Scripture, we see that breakthroughs do not come because people were the strongest, the smartest, or the most qualified. Breakthroughs came because they obeyed. Obedience may seem small, but it carries supernatural weight. When Jesus told Simon Peter to let down his nets after a long night of catching nothing, Peter could have argued. He had the experience, he knew the water, and he had already tried. Logic said there was no point in trying again. But Peter's response was key. Nevertheless, at your word, I will let down the net. That act of obedience opened the door to a blessing so great that the nets began to break and the boats began to sink. The blessing wasn't in Peter's skill as a fisherman. It was in his willingness to obey the word of the master. The same principle runs all throughout the Bible. Noah obeyed the strange instruction to build an ark when there was no rain, and his obedience preserved humanity. Abraham obeyed the call to leave his homeland without even knowing where he was going, and his obedience made him the father of nations. Joshua obeyed the command to march around the walls of Jericho, and his obedience brought the walls crashing down. Time after time, obedience is the bridge between promise and fulfillment. The reason obedience unlocks blessing is because it demonstrates trust. When you obey God, even when you don't fully understand, you are saying, Lord, I trust you more than I trust my own reasoning. I trust your word above what I see. That kind of trust moves the heart of God. He delights in those who walk by faith, and he rewards those who take him at his word. Obedience also positions us to be in the right place at the right time. Think of the widow who obeyed the prophet's word to pour out the little oil she had left. It made no sense, but her obedience turned lack into overflow. She was positioned for provision because she obeyed. When you choose to obey God's voice, whether it's forgiving someone who hurt you, giving generously, praying for someone, or stepping out into a new opportunity, you align yourself with the flow of his blessing. You place yourself under his covering, and in that place, he releases favor that no one else can stop. Sometimes obedience is costly. It may require humility, sacrifice, or letting go of something familiar. But every time God calls you to obey, he has something greater on the other side. The enemy tries to convince you that obedience will cause you to lose, but in reality, obedience is the only way to truly win. You cannot outgive God, you cannot out-sacrifice him, and you cannot obey him without seeing the reward in due season. It is also important to remember that delayed obedience is disobedience. Many people miss blessings not because they said no to God, but because they said later. They put off what he asked them to do, waiting for a more convenient time. But obedience is powerful in its timing. When God speaks, he is aligning circumstances and setting the stage for your breakthrough. A delayed response can mean a missed opportunity. Even the small acts of obedience matter. Saying a kind word, choosing integrity when no one is watching, spending time in prayer when you'd rather sleep, serving others when it goes unnoticed. All of these acts of obedience carry blessing. They may not bring an immediate reward, but they are deposits into a future harvest. God sees every act of faithfulness, and nothing done in obedience to him is wasted. If you want to walk in the fullness of blessing, make obedience your lifestyle. Decide in advance that when God speaks, you will act. Don't wait until the command comes to wrestle with whether or not you'll obey. Settle it in your heart now, Lord, whatever you say, I will do. That kind of surrendered heart becomes a magnet for blessing. The path to blessing is not complicated. It is not reserved for the most talented or the most gifted. It is simply the path of obedience. Every miracle in Scripture is connected to someone who is willing to listen and obey. And the same is true today. Obedience still unlocks blessing. Destiny is never discovered in the place of comfort. Comfort zones feel safe, predictable, and easy, but they are not where growth or calling is realized. Every person who has ever stepped into their God-given destiny has had to leave behind the familiar to embrace the unknown. The truth is, comfort is often the greatest enemy of calling. As long as we stay where it feels easy, we will never see the fullness of what God has prepared for us. Think about Abraham. He lived in Ur of the Chaldeans, surrounded by family, culture, and familiarity. Then God called him to leave it all and go to a land he did not know. That one decision to step out of his comfort zone changed history. Abraham could have stayed where he was. He could have chosen the safety of the familiar. But had he stayed, he would never have become the father of nations. His destiny was not in staying comfortable, it was in stepping out. The same principle applies to us. Your comfort zone may be a routine, a circle of people, a secure job, or even a way of thinking. It may not be wrong in itself, but if you cling to it, it can hold you back from the future God has designed. Destiny requires risk. It requires trust. It requires moving into spaces that stretch your faith and demand that you rely on God more than on your own strength. Comfort zones also dull passion. When you live in routine and predictability, you stop expecting more. You stop dreaming big and your vision shrinks to the size of what feels safe. But destiny is always bigger than safety. Destiny calls you to believe for what you cannot see, to reach for what you cannot yet touch, and to walk where you've never walked before. Just as a bird must eventually leave the nest to fly, you too must leave your place of ease to soar into your purpose. Jesus often disrupted comfort zones. When he called his disciples, they were working their jobs, living their normal lives, and staying in what was familiar. Yet he looked at them and said, "Follow me." That call pulled them out of boats, away from tax tables, and into a journey that changed the world. None of them could have fulfilled their destiny if they had clung to comfort. Their lives became significant because they were willing to be uncomfortable for the sake of the call. It is in discomfort that growth happens. Muscles don't grow without resistance. Faith doesn't strengthen without trials. Courage doesn't develop without facing fear. Every challenge that pushes you beyond your comfort zone is also pushing you closer to your destiny. The very thing that feels uncomfortable today may be the tool God is using to prepare you for tomorrow. Sometimes comfort zones are also tied to relationships. You may have to walk away from certain voices that keep you small, from people who don't encourage your growth, or from circles that limit your vision. That step may feel lonely at first, but it is often the separation that leads to elevation. God cannot bring new people, new opportunities, and new doors into your life if you refuse to let go of the old ones holding you back. The fear of the unknown is often what keeps people in their comfort zones. But the unknown is not unknown to God. What feels uncertain to you is already clear to him. He goes before you, and if he is calling you out of comfort, it is only because he has prepared something greater on the other side. Trusting him means stepping even when you cannot see the full picture. Your destiny will never be discovered in the shallow waters of safety. It is found when you launch out into the deep, when you step into places that require faith, when you leave behind the familiar for the extraordinary. You were not created to simply survive. You were created to fulfill a purpose that touches lives, changes hearts, and impacts eternity. So don't settle for comfort when you were made for calling. Don't trade destiny for safety. Be willing to step beyond what feels easy, and you will find that the very place you feared is the place where God's power meets you. Your destiny is waiting just outside your comfort zone, and the moment you step out, you will discover that God has already gone ahead of you to make the impossible possible. Weariness is something every person faces. Life has a way of draining strength, whether through long seasons of waiting, battles that seem unending, or prayers that feel unanswered. When fatigue sets in, the temptation to quit becomes strong. But perseverance is the key that transforms weariness into victory. It is not about never feeling tired. It is about choosing to keep moving forward even when you are. Victory is not reserved for those who never struggle. It is promised to those who refuse to give up. The Apostle Paul compared life to a race. A race is not won by the person who starts the fastest, but by the one who endures until the finish line. Perseverance is that determination in your spirit that says, I may be weary, but I will not stop here. The finish line may be just around the corner, but if you give up in your weariness, you will never see it. That is why perseverance is so powerful. It carries you through the exhaustion and positions you to step into the reward that comes at the end. Think of the farmer who plants seeds in the ground. He does not see fruit overnight. He waters, he waits, he works under the sun day after day, often weary from labor, but he keeps going because he knows harvest is coming. The soil may look unchanged for weeks, but beneath the surface, life is breaking forth. If he gave up in weariness, the harvest would never be seen. The same is true in your life. Perseverance is what allows you to reap the fruit of what you have sown. Even Jesus experienced weariness. In the Garden of Gethsemane, he was overwhelmed to the point of sweating drops of blood. He prayed, Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. That was weariness speaking. But perseverance followed with, nevertheless, not my will, but yours be done. And because he persevered through that moment of anguish, the greatest victory in history, the redemption of humanity, was accomplished. Weariness did not win because perseverance carried him to the cross and beyond to resurrection. Perseverance also transforms weariness because it shifts the source of your strength. When you push forward in your own strength, you will burn out quickly. But when you decide to persevere, you open yourself to God's strength working in you. Isaiah 40:31 declares, "Those who wait on the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint." Perseverance is not about grinding endlessly in your own ability. It is about leaning on God's ability when yours runs out. His strength is made perfect in weakness. Many victories in life are missed, not because people lack talent or opportunity, but because they quit too soon. The enemy knows he cannot stop the plans of God, but he tries to wear you down until you surrender them yourself. He whispers that it's not worth it, that nothing is changing, that your prayers are pointless. But every time you choose to persevere, you silence his lies. You declare that you will not quit until you see what God promised. The amazing thing is that perseverance doesn't just lead to victory. It transforms you along the way. In the process of pushing through weariness, your faith grows deeper, your character strengthens, and your testimony becomes richer. The trial that once felt unbearable becomes the very story that inspires others not to give up. Perseverance gives purpose to the pain and turns seasons of struggle into testimonies of triumph. If you are weary, don't let it define you. Let perseverance carry you. Remind yourself that every step forward, no matter how small, is progress toward victory. You may feel exhausted today, but victory is often closest when the battle feels hardest. Hold on, keep pressing, and keep believing. Perseverance is the bridge that will carry you from weariness to the place where you can lift your hands in triumph and say, God brought me through. What separates the ordinary from the extraordinary is not always talent, luck, or opportunity. More often than not, the difference is found in the willingness to go a little further, to give a little more, to stretch a little past what is expected. The extraordinary is hidden in the extra. It is the unseen effort, the hidden sacrifice, and the quiet persistence that transform the average into something remarkable. Ordinary people do what is required. They meet the minimum. They stay within the boundaries of convenience, and they stop at the point where it becomes uncomfortable. But those who step into the extraordinary are the ones who refuse to stop there. They give when no one else is giving. They forgive when others hold grudges. They pray when others are sleeping. They believe when everyone else has given up hope. That extra effort, that choice to go beyond the easy road is what sets them apart. In Scripture, we see this principle over and over again. When the widow gave her last 2 coins, it seemed small compared to the large sums others were giving, but Jesus said she had given more than all the rest because her extra came from a place of sacrifice. When the boy with 5 loaves and 2 fish handed over his lunch, it didn't look like much. Yet in God's hands, that extra willingness to give became a miracle that fed thousands. When a Roman soldier asked someone to carry his pack for 1 mile, the law required it, but Jesus said, go with him too. That 2nd mile, the extra, was where testimony and transformation happened. The extraordinary always requires doing more than is convenient. Think of athletes who train before the sun rises, musicians who practice for hours after others have stopped, or leaders who choose to serve when no one is watching. Success doesn't come from the one-time effort. It comes from the consistent decision to put in the extra time, the extra discipline, the extra faith. Ordinary effort produces ordinary results. Extraordinary effort produces extraordinary outcomes. This principle also applies spiritually. A short prayer before meals is good, but pressing into God in the secret place, interceding for others, worshiping when no one sees, that's the extra that births spiritual power. Reading a verse here and there is fine, but diving deep into the word, meditating on it, and living it out is what transforms lives. Showing up to church is important, but serving, giving, and pouring yourself into others, that is where extraordinary blessing flows. The extraordinary is not about perfection, it's about willingness. God doesn't look for those who can do everything flawlessly. He looks for those who are willing to go beyond what is comfortable and give him their extra. That little extra could be the difference between a dream that stays dormant and a dream that comes alive. It could be the difference between a marriage that barely survives and a marriage that thrives. It could be the difference between a life that touches few and a life that impacts generations. Often the extraordinary is found in hidden places. Nobody applauds the hours spent in prayer, the sacrifices made in private, or the tears shed in faith, but heaven sees it. God rewards it. And when the blessing comes, others may call it sudden or lucky, but you will know it was the extra steps, the extra prayers, the extra faith that unlocked the extraordinary. The question is not whether you want to live an extraordinary life. The real question is whether you are willing to give the extra it requires. To go the second mile, to do the unseen work, to press forward when it would be easier to stop. Extraordinary lives are not born in comfort. They are forged in sacrifice, persistence, and faith. So don't settle for ordinary when extraordinary is within reach. Add the extra to your effort, your faith, your love, and your obedience. That little extra could be the very thing that turns your life into a testimony of God's greatness. The extraordinary is hidden in the extra, and when you choose to give it, you position yourself for miracles beyond anything you imagined. Many times in life, the difference between seeing your miracle and missing it is just one more step. Miracles are rarely found in the place of convenience. They are often waiting just beyond the point of weariness, just past the line of comfort, and just after the moment you feel like quitting. That's why going a little further matters. Each time you push past where you normally stop, you draw closer to the breakthrough God has prepared for you. The disciples experienced this truth when they fished all night and caught nothing. They were tired, discouraged, and ready to give up. Then came the instruction to cast their nets again, but not in the shallow water. They had to go a little further into the deep. They could have resisted. They could have said, we've already tried. But instead, they pushed out a little further. And that small act positioned them for a miracle catch so large it broke their nets and filled their boats. The miracle was not in the shallow water. It was in the deep. It was just a little further than they wanted to go. That same principle applies to your life. Maybe you have prayed for years and feel like nothing is changing. Maybe you've worked hard toward a dream, but the doors haven't opened. Maybe you've forgiven someone again and again, only to feel the pain return. In those moments, it is tempting to quit. But what if your miracle is waiting just beyond the point of surrender? What if all it takes is one more prayer, one more act of faith, one more step of obedience? A little further is where battles are won. When David faced Goliath, he didn't just run toward the giant with a sling and a stone. He pressed a little further into the valley when everyone else stayed back in fear. That step of courage brought him face to face with his miracle of victory. When the woman with the issue of blood heard Jesus was passing by, she didn't sit where she was. She pressed through the crowd, going a little further than her weakness wanted her to go, and she touched the hem of his garment. In that moment, her miracle came. The enemy knows this truth, which is why he fights you hardest right before the breakthrough. Weariness increases, doubts grow louder, and resistance feels stronger just as you are about to step into victory. He wants you to stop short, to give up when you are only steps away from your miracle. But when you choose to push a little further, when you choose to keep moving forward despite the resistance, you silence the lies of the enemy and prove that your faith is greater than your feelings. A little further also stretches your faith. It requires you to move beyond what feels possible in your own strength and lean fully on God's. That is where his power shows up. Miracles are not born in places of self-reliance. They are born in places where you step into the unknown, trusting God to meet you there. When you go further than you thought you could, you discover that he has been waiting for you all along with strength, provision, and breakthrough. Sometimes the little further looks different for each of us. For one, it may mean praying one more time. For another, it may mean forgiving again. For someone else, it may mean stepping out into an opportunity that feels risky. But whatever it looks like, the principle is the same. Do not stop where you've always stopped. Push past the line of comfort and faithlessness. Go further and you will see what you could never see while standing still. Your miracle is not far away. It is closer than you think, but it requires you to take that next step. Refuse to stop short. Refuse to quit. Choose to believe that each step forward, no matter how small, is bringing you closer to the breakthrough you've been praying for. The miracle is waiting, but it's not in the shallow waters of comfort. It's a little further ahead. And if you'll take that step, you'll find yourself standing in the place of answered prayers, overflowing blessing, and undeniable victory.